Hi everyone, and welcome to this very first cross-product Hangout on Air. As most of you know, we run sessions every week, but they are usually focused on single products, so either DB360, Search Ads 360, or GA360. In this case, we're going to start running a set of cross-product sessions. This is going to be the first one, so expect to hear more about them in the upcoming weeks.
So for this first session, we're focusing on marketing in the cloud. So from this session, we're going to be looking at how Google thinks about marketing in the cloud. And for that, we've brought in two special guests from London who have dialed in to host this session. So they go by the names of Carl and Tom. So I'm going to pass over to you now.
Thanks, guys, and good morning, everyone. Really happy to be here today to talk about a topic that I believe to be top of mind for pretty much every business that's operating in marketing campaigns today, and that is cloud. So my name is Carl. I look after data platforms at Google. I'm based in London. I'm also joined by my colleague Tom, who's a customer solutions engineer.
Hi, everybody.
And over the next half hour or so, we're going to do a bit of level setting and talk about the opportunity as a whole when it comes to cloud and try and contextualize it for you. Tom's then going to talk a bit about data integration and analysis, which is one of the key areas and use cases that can be solved by cloud. And then we're going to give you a live demo of two Google Cloud tools, Data Prep and BigQuery. I'm sure many of you on the call are familiar with these products, but what we really wanted to do is give you some practical examples that you could take back to the office and start applying in your day-to-day. At the end of this session, we have some time for questions as well, so feel free to submit those questions. We'll endeavor to answer all of them. So when I first started looking at this space, cloud and marketing, the way I began to contextualize it was in the context of the consumer and changing consumer behaviors. What we've seen in the past few years is really the rise of what we call the super empowered consumer. This is someone that is more curious than ever before. I think it's fair to say that everyone on this live stream today has gone on their phones and has looked up how to do something on YouTube, or looked up instructions and so forth. Anyone could be an instant expert due to mobile phones. So we're very curious. We're also a lot more demanding than we once were. A great example of this is our expectations for personalized experiences. If you are new to a city and you're looking for a coffee shop, for example, what we've seen is that search queries such as coffee shop has now increased past coffee shop near me. So people have stopped dropping the use of near me in that phrase because they expect their mobile device is going to present the right result based on their location. And finally, consumers are a lot more impatient than they once were. I can speak for myself. I'm always looking for same-day shipping or next-day delivery. We expect websites to load super fast, be very efficient, and that's become an important part of our expectations. And what this means for advertising is that, of course, as consumers, we expect advertising to be relevant and assistive. So I think these are important trends to understand how the consumers evolved. But there's also some other trends that have arisen in the last couple of years. I think most acutely, you'll all have been working on privacy and user control. So last year we saw GDPR. We've seen changes to web browsers in terms of how third-party cookies and so on are used. And this has really made marketers think carefully about how user data can be used in a compliant way to drive better outcomes for users, better experiences, and of course, better results. The second trend is around the volume and variety of data that's out there. Now, when I joined Google a few years ago, I was working on Google Analytics. And when I would do presentations like this, I would often give a statistic that talked about 500 billion different digital moments are tracked by Google Analytics on a daily basis. That's a tremendous amount of data. And I'm sure each and every one of you, whether you're working at an agency or at an advertiser, have wealths of data that you're not necessarily utilizing to its full extent today. And thirdly, is a real drive for sophistication. At the end of the day, there's a lot of value that you can get from tools like Google Marketing Platform. But every business has access to those tools. So there's an increasing drive for sophistication to do more with what's available within that platform and beyond. And I think to bring this to life a bit, it's worth thinking about this research study that Google released with Boston Consultancy Group earlier this year. What we did was actually map a sample of advertisers based on their digital marketing maturity. And we had 4 different categories, from nascent, which is referring to advertisers that are deploying fairly rudimentary marketing techniques, basic campaign targeting and planning, all the way through to what we describe as multi-moment advertisers. And these are companies that have really been successful at maximizing the usage of their tools, whether it be Google Marketing Platform tools or otherwise, and also connecting data together to drive incremental insights. And the results we saw is that as customers get more sophisticated in their marketing techniques, the better results they would receive in terms of, for example, cost per acquisition, or CPA. You get a lower CPA. Return on ad spend, or ROAS, that improves. And of course, the overall revenue from digital marketing increases as well. So I think this drive for sophistication is a trend that is really important to consider. So the question is, why aren't more people in this 2% bucket? Why is it relatively small? And I think what's clear is that it's pretty challenging to get value from all the data that we're collecting today. This is a stat that's almost 2 years old now, that shows that only 0.5% of the world's data is actually analyzed. And I think that's for a number of reasons: resourcing, costs, and simply put, that people don't know where to begin with that analysis. The rise of machine learning and cloud solutions and some of the stuff we're going to talk about is helping to really analyze that remaining data. And as a result of that data not being analyzed, we're also seeing that 8 in 10 marketers do not feel they have a single view of their customers. And actually, Tom and I were presenting at an event earlier this week on the same topic, and I asked for a show of hands. It was an audience of about 150 people, and I asked who feels they have a single view of the customer, and I think only 2 people put their hands up in that room. So this stat probably is undercooking the extent of the problem at the moment. So how do we solve for this? One mental model, I think, or mental tool that's quite useful is to imagine that you're running a new startup, or you're about to launch a new business. How would you set up the infrastructure and do the groundwork, lay the foundations to help tackle this from scratch? The first thing you would do is consider, what data do you find valuable? Is it your website data? Is it your CRM data? Is it your billing data? Now, a lot of advertisers have talked to us about data becoming harder to use, because on one end of the spectrum, perhaps users are not consenting, whether they haven't opted in to a GDPR cookie consent message on the website. On the other end of the spectrum, there's not a common denominator, a common user ID between different data sets. So how do you join it together? The reality is, I'm sure when you look at the wealth of data you're trying to bring together, some of that data may well be superfluous to driving marketing performance. So I think this is really important to consider. And when you start thinking about how you actually bring these data sets together, a cloud-based solution becomes an obvious solution. Cloud solutions are fantastic because it gives you tremendous scale, so you can capture as much data as you need, but also at a very low cost. So I think that's really important to consider why cloud is becoming increasingly utilized in the marketing space. Now, I know there's been several of these on-air sessions on Google Marketing Platform tools before, so you'll be probably familiar with this slide, which is effectively the GMP stack. So marketing technology stacks, or MarTech stacks, has been this buzzword over the past few years, and that refers to marketers that adopt, for example, an ad server to manage their advertising, an analytics platform to manage their web analytics, a demand-side platform to manage their display buying, and so on. This is like a MarTech stack. And what I'd like to propose is that increasingly cloud-based solutions are being considered as another layer of that stack that enables you to go forward with use cases that may not be possible in the user interfaces of these tools alone. So what use cases are there and how do we get started? Well, it's always good to start simple. Find a high value use case and start from there. A very practical example would be in many MarTech platforms, including Google's today, we don't necessarily store data indefinitely, depending on the tool and depending what the data set is. So in some scenarios, if you wanted to do year-on-year analysis across, say, 3 years, that data may not exist in the platform after 3 years. For you to do that analysis, you have to consider exporting that data and storing it for that historical analysis. So that's a very basic example of what you could do. And generally speaking, use cases that use cloud slot into one of 3 buckets. Either you can improve what you already do. So for example, many businesses today are still using spreadsheets for reporting. It's very manual. They're emailing spreadsheets around, and it's quite hard to share insights around the organization. Imagine if that data was stored in a solution like BigQuery with a dashboard like Data Studio or Tableau or Looker on top of it. So you have a more real-time view of what's going on. That's a very simple example of improving a legacy business process. The second bucket of use cases is around finding insights that drive performance. A great example of this is something like customer lifetime value. Now, those of you on the call that are familiar with Google Analytics will know that there is a lifetime value metric within that platform. So it will show you, for example, the lifetime of a user in Google Analytics and how much they've spent with your business or how many times they've converted and so on. So that's interesting, but it doesn't necessarily include data that you have about that user that sits in another database. It also doesn't really predict what the future holds for that user. Are they going to stop spending at a certain point, or is that their last ever purchase? Cloud-based solutions allow you to do that sort of advanced analysis, taking offline data sets, joining it with data that you've got from, for example, Google Analytics, and enables you to get those lifetime value metrics, propensity modeling insights, or, for example, churn analysis. And Tom's going to show us an example shortly of how this could work. The third bucket of use cases is really around wholesale innovation. This is where machine learning really comes into play. We have seen great examples of marketers using, for example, our Vision API to understand common traits for high-performing creative in terms of banner advertising to inform how they should be designing their creatives moving forward. That's a really clever example of how machine learning can help solve something that it's very difficult for a human to do alone. So now what we want to do is bring this to life a bit. We're going to go into some demos, and I'm going to hand over to Tom.
Thanks, Carl. Hi, everybody. My name is Tom, and like Carl mentioned, we're going to be talking about BigQuery. We're going to be talking about Cloud Data Prep. We'll have a short demo of how you can transform the data using Cloud Data Prep and run a couple of BigQuery queries. So when I'm working on data integration projects, I like to divide them into 3 steps. So first one, collection. It's very much about finding out what data is available to me and sort of what data I need to achieve my goal. Also, it's about building all necessary data pipelines, which will feed the data into one place, commonly called a data lake. Second step, analysis, can be kind of divided into 2 different types. So transformation, it's about reshaping some of the data we collected in step 1 to fit our use case. But sometimes it's only about analysis, so running a query on the top of the multiple data sets we collect in step 1, or running a machine learning model on the top of that data. And the third and last step, action, can be also divided into 2 types. So sometimes we just want to visualize the data and to help us to make some informed decision. But sometimes we want to activate some features directly in ad platforms. Today, we're going to be predominantly talking about the first 2 steps. Like I mentioned before, I'm going to give you a short introduction to BigQuery. We're going to go to the platform, and we're also going to use Cloud Data Prep to transform the data. So Cloud Data Prep is Google's tool which will allow you to visually explore, clean, and prepare the data for analysis or machine learning. Okay, so first of all, to host all of our data, we're going to use BigQuery. BigQuery is Google Cloud's enterprise data warehouse, which enables you to analyze terabytes of data in seconds. In general, BigQuery is an amazing product. As an engineer, I really love using it. And there are many things great about BigQuery, and I'd like to call out a couple of them. So to start with, BigQuery is serverless. And what does it mean? It means that whenever I'm using it, I don't have to manage any infrastructure to run my queries. You don't have to provision any virtual machines or worry about failing hard drives. BigQuery is incredibly elastic, and it scales to any size quickly and seamlessly without you even noticing. Secondly, BigQuery comes with machine learning capabilities. So when I'm working on machine learning problem, I can work directly on it in BigQuery. There's no need to program any ML solution using Python or Java. Models are trained and accessed in BigQuery using SQL. Because in general, moving and formatting large amounts of data for Python-based ML frameworks sometimes can take a lot of time and, frankly, be complicated. BigQuery turns this painful process into a very simple one. Thirdly, BigQuery returns results in real time. So it's really, really, really fast. And by real time, I mean it returns results in seconds. So the other day, I was running a query which was analyzing over 100 billion rows, and I was still getting my results under 20 seconds, which is amazing. And I didn't have to configure any additional resources. It automatically scaled for me and scaled down after my query was completed. Another great feature of BigQuery is data transfer service. So it allows you to automatically ingest data from various ad platforms and other APIs directly into GCP. And it's important to point out that data transfer service supports external data sources such as Salesforce CRM, Adobe Analytics, and Facebook ads. So it's not only Google platforms which are supported. And with that, we're going to have a quick demo. OK, so this is BigQuery UI. On the left-hand side, you'll see the data sets available to me. So I create a bunch of data sets which we're going to be using in this demo. In this panel right here, it's my query editor, where I'm going to be writing SQL code for my query. So so before this presentation, I created some test CRM data. However, it's not exactly in the format which it needs to be. So I'm going to use the Cloud Data Prep to reshape it a little bit to fit my use case. To go to use Cloud Data Prep, you have to click on the menu in your Google Cloud console and scroll down to Big Data section and select Data Prep. So it takes a second to load. OK, so normally what you would do to start with would be importing the data directly from BigQuery or GCS. So you select import data and select one of the options available to you. So depending on where you're pulling the data from, in my case, is my CRM data set and user data table. However, I already did it before the presentation, so it's already over here. And I can select it and click Wrangle in New Flow button to start reshaping it. So now Data Prep is loading my table. Should be ready in a second. OK, so as you see in in this table, we've got 3 columns. First one, customer ID. This is our CRM ID, however you identify your user. Second is customer name, and the third one is user data. So there's a couple of things wrong with this table, and immediately what stands out is that the customer name casing is sort of set at random. So some of the names are lowercase, some of them are uppercase. So I kind of want to clean it up. So what I can do is just select the menu over here, go to Format, and click on Convert to Proper Case. And at this point, Cloud Data Prep is going to show me a preview of how the transformation is going to look like after it's done. So I can see all the names are in proper case. So I'm happy with this. So what I'm going to do is just click Add button, and that's it. Everything is formatted the way I want it. So now jumping off to the user data column. As we see, user data contains a bunch of information about the user, 3 variables, a category, somebody mostly buys from, city they're from, and type of a customer. So that could be your lifetime value bucket or any type of segmentation you use. However, all this user data is in one column, and because of this, it's not really useful to me. So what I need to do to make it useful is I need to split it in a separate column. So what I can do is, because I see that the semicolon is the divider between the values, all I have to do is just highlight the semicolon, and immediately Data Prep picks up on the fact that I want to divide this column into 3 separate ones without me even having to specify what I need to do. So it has a machine learning model underneath which analyzes the data in all of the columns and realizes that the likelihood of me trying to divide it into 3 different columns is the highest. That's the first suggestion. So I'm happy with that. So I'm gonna just add this as a step. And since I'm not gonna be using city, I can just remove it. And what we need to do now is just clean up the value inside those 2 columns. So we need to remove the variable name. So what we can do is just highlight the name of the variable and select the option to replace it with an empty string. Do it again. And that's it. That's with 5 very simple steps. We turned something which was relatively useless to us in that format to very valuable table, which we now can join with other tables. As you see on the right-hand side, Data Prep maintains something which we call a recipe, which is being modified so it contains all the instructions we follow to arrive to this result. And even if I make a mistake, what I can do is just delete one of the steps, and Data Prep is going to revert back to the state before I apply the transformation. So this is great because it allows you to it allows people to audit the work of analysts. So you don't have to explain what you did to arrive to this result. And also, even if you make a mistake, you can easily go back, and because you can just jump between those steps freely. So now what I would need to do is press the Run Job button, which basically takes me to the UI part where I configure where should be the destination table for my transformation. So what it means that I can configure the endpoint where this table is going to be populated. So I've got a couple of options. So I can either send a CSV to Google Storage Bucket, but I can also select BigQuery and my CRM data set and create a new table over here. And yeah, but for the purpose of this demo, I already did it. But once this flow is created, you can schedule it and run it on a daily basis. So whenever new data flows into your original data set, which is unformatted, you can just run it on schedule and transform it in the same way using the recipe you just built. So what we're going to do now is we're going to quickly jump to BigQuery. And so just to give you a quick overview what we did. So we had initially the user data, which wasn't formatted. However, we used the data prep to clean it up, and we've got now a nice formatted table. So we've got customer ID over here, and another data point which I brought in to my BigQuery instance is GA data. So I leveraged one of the data transfer service. So there is a feature in GA BigQuery data export which allows you to basically download all the data from your GA360 to BigQuery directly. So since in my GA implementation, I was also tracking the CRM ID, which allows me now to join both of those data sets. So I wrote a quick test query over here, which joins on a CRM customer ID and GA user ID field. And if I run it quickly, the resulting table contains our CRM ID, which is the join key, and some of the dimensions which originated in CRM, and some of the metrics going directly from GA. And this allows you to kind of enrich your analysis using the CRM segments which you built in your CRM system. And with that, I'm going to hand over back to Carl.
Thanks, Tom. So if we can switch back to the other screen, hopefully you found that demo illuminating. I think it really shows that this stuff isn't as difficult as it might sound. I think a couple of key takeaways before we move on to onto the questions is that firstly, cloud solves really for marketing use cases. It shouldn't be seen as this very different side of the business within your organization. Yes, many businesses now are using cloud for infrastructure, for hosting their websites, and many other business processes. But there are lots of marketing use cases that these solutions can solve for, and quite often these use cases are not possible to do within the user interfaces of your, for example, demand-side platform, ad server, and so on. The second key takeaway is really around starting simple and aim for quick wins. You saw how quickly Tom was able to clean some data and join some offline data to GA360. That enables a whole bunch of other use cases, like being able to do a lifetime value analysis and many other things. So really do think about how you can start simple. And thirdly is really think a bit beyond BigQuery. I think many people on the call will be users of Google Analytics 360, so have perhaps already used BigQuery in the past. But data prep is a really nice solution as well that I think adds a lot of value. So those are a few key takeaways. I just want to touch on a few of the questions that have come through before the live stream and while we've been on it. The first question that came through was really around how does the centralization of reporting work within an organization? Tom, you got any thoughts on that?
To centralize reporting, what I would do is, I mean, from a Google perspective, most of our products have reporting APIs. So if we look, for example, at the DV360 reporting API, what I could do is build a quick Python script which uses this API and sends all the reporting data to BigQuery into one big data set. And what I then can do is plug this data to Data Studio dashboard, which will allow me to visualize some of those reporting. Mm-hmm. And you can either do it, for example, using a Python script, running this in your infrastructure, or you could also use something like Cloud Functions, where you can also run Python code and connect to those APIs.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you described there was a lot of complex things in there, like Python and so forth. Obviously, we talked a bit about the BigQuery data transfer service as well. Mm-hmm. Does that have access to like Facebook data and other data sources?
Yeah, so some of the third-party connectors, which I talked about before, and they also support Facebook ads. So what you could do is use those connectors to also enrich your data set in BigQuery with some of the Facebook data and start kind of, and you can use them alongside with the Google's data in a single dashboard.
Okay, great. So I think what we're seeing a lot of advertisers do is also just use, the off-the-shelf connections that we have into Data Studio to visualize data. So for example, within Data Studio, which is our free dashboarding tool, there are many connectors both to Google products and third parties like Facebook and so on that you can use to gather data together. But of course, the direct connection between BigQuery and Data Studio is super powerful. So it's very easy to put a dashboard on top of, for example, the data set that Tom just demoed. Another question we had was around privacy and consent in regards to CRM data and personalization. I think in general, the thing to bear in mind here is you have to engage with your company's legal team to understand what the requirements are in terms of consent. In terms of Google products, we have an EU consent policy that applies to our ads products, which all advertisers that use our tools agree to comply with. But if you do have questions around privacy and consent, please reach out to your legal colleagues. We had another question around how do we estimate the cost of all this stuff? Because obviously BigQuery, DataPrep, they're not free products. So those of you that have GA360 may well be using some BigQuery credit that has come with GA360, a BigQuery voucher. And in general, because it's a fairly cheap platform to use, a lot of people don't exceed that volume of credit. But if you do want to estimate cost, there is a cost calculator. So if you do a Google search for Google Cloud Cost Calculator, you'll have access to a tool where you can try and have some sort of level of prediction as to what your costs might be. Okay, we also had a question around the buckets of use cases that I mentioned, and in particular, the third bucket, which was talking about wholesale business transformation using machine learning. The question was around measuring creative sentiment. So the example that I was talking over was there's a few case studies I've seen where imagine you have hundreds of thousands of different banner advertising, and you know the performance in terms of click-through rate for each one of those creative assets. And you want to be able to analyze at scale what are the common traits between those creative assets that correlate to a high click-through rate, i.e. what do you need to put in the image to drive a higher click-through rate? Is it a different color scheme? Is it a type of a certain model of car? Is it male versus female on the banner ad itself? That's really a solution that's very difficult for humans to do at scale, right? Looking through 100,000 different assets and trying to find correlations. And that's really where machine learning comes into play. So in this example, you would use something like the Vision API to understand those common traits that drive performance. So I know the question here talks about sentiment specifically. This is more around performance, but there may well be able to be ways to correlate that to sentiment if you're also pulling in, for example, social media information and so on. Had another question around online tutorial for BigQuery. Tom, have you got any suggestions?
Yeah, I think the best place to start is our cloud page, which if you Google just Google Cloud BigQuery Quick Start, you'll be taken to a very comprehensive guide which takes you from the basics to quite complicated concepts. Yeah,
great. And one more question has just come in around ITP. So this is the feature of Safari that effectively disables third-party cookies. And the question is, has ITP affected the capability of having a single view of the customer, i.e. connecting IDs? So this is a very good question. Of course, it's not only ITP that has made this challenging, but a lot of businesses, Google included, when we release raw data, we don't necessarily provide a user ID that you're able to join to different data sets. So I think it's worth bearing in mind that there isn't necessarily a perfect solution for getting a single view of the customer, particularly in this post-GDPR world. Increasingly, MarTech companies and other companies will not necessarily provide data at the granularity for you to do that join. So yes, ITP has had an impact, particularly on use cases like remarketing, frequency capping, and so on. But also in terms of raw data, you have to bear in mind that the data doesn't exist in the first place necessarily if because of ITP or other browser change, that data has effectively been stripped because they've blocked the cookie. So yes, it's had some impact, but there's still a lot of value to be had in connecting what data you do have. There was a final question here around, is there a way to have access to BigQuery and data prep for training purposes? I think
I believe there is a credit, right? That's
right. I think everyone that signs up to Google Cloud, so even if you have a personal like Gmail account, if you go on Google Cloud, you'll get access to $300 of free credit that you can use within a year.
So yeah, it's $300, and also when you're using BigQuery, as far as I remember, I think first terabyte of data is also free. And BigQuery is for the training purposes a very cheap product in that sense, because you can run a lot of test queries without touching too much data, and I think you can easily stay within this terabyte.
Yep. Great. So I think that was the final question that we've had. I hope you found this session useful. So I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. One other shout out, please do sign up to the GMP bi-weekly newsletter. The link is on the YouTube channel, and you'll be able to receive the latest updates on products, inventory, opportunities, training, and so on. So with that, I'd like to say goodbye and thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.